Ladies and gentlemen, tonight's performance will include obligatory pea soup, terrible Jesus movies, and an ancient ritual which is literally off the chain. All this and more as we discuss exorcism movies here on Created Things. Ha 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 ha.
Good evening, and welcome to a very special evening with your favorite podcast, Created Things, the only podcast where we hope to find somebody projectile vomiting and stop them from doing it anymore. I'm your host, gentle, caring, tender, Catholic priest, medievalist, Father Gabriel, and with me is my co-host, savage, cruel, wild, out of control, artist, psychotherapist, Jacob, Flores Popchek. How are you?
I am savage. I am out of control. I knew quite a few people who would back up that assessment of my personality, unfortunately.
Good.
I think you've kind of hit the nail on the head. I agree that you are caring and even gentle. I'm not sure I would ever describe you as tender, either
probably not.
Either literally or I mean, you seem like a thin guy. I don't think there are too many soft spots on you that are too fatty and tenderish to dine upon. I think about these things, of course, because as you said, I am wild and savage, and so I want to cannibalize.
Yeah, dine upon one's friends, which I think is reasonable.
Right, exactly.
I mean,
sort of an Army Hammer type situation, and you don't feel tender enough to want that.
That seems fair. I saw a lotion bottle the other day that
was it in a basket. Did you put the lotion in the basket?
Did you put it in that basket?
See, we're just trading all the Halloween things right now.
That's just exactly it. It's it feel like it should have been a Halloween, some sort of nightmare Halloween gag, only like some sort of nightmare Halloween gag that like only a marketer in hell would know to target me with, because the lotion bottle just said experience the power of soft, and then it explained that the company has a whole like multi-million-dollar multinational campaign to promote, quote, the power of soft, not softness, mind you, the power of soft, because, and this is no joke, the tagline, because, quote, soft unites us all.
I mean, so we're going to do the whole episode on just that phrase, right? That's all we're going to be talking about today.
On how, whether, or in what possible respect it could be true that soft unites us all. Discuss. Talk amongst yourselves.
I am baffled by that. This is, of course, in German.
No,
right?
no, this was
translating this from German.
No, this was actually in English. This was in I took a, as one is wont to do, I took a 4-day trip back to the United States, and then I came back. But in the meantime, I saw the most important lotion bottle in the history of mankind because it's promoting the power of soft, which is all there. I did, however, then, just to get the German connection, I did, in fact, finish reading Hermann Hesse's book Siddhartha, which was like Siddhartha. It was written in the 1920s, but it was basically the Eat, Pray, Love of the 1960s. All these hippies found it and were like, OMG, it's this incredibly spiritual but not religious book written by like a pantheist, confusingly identified German man from the 20s who it just basically says that, like, yeah, just do whatever you want and it will be good that you've done it because you've done it, which is very cool, Anyway, among the meaningless kind of destined to be absorbed and adored by the 1960s platitudes in the book there's this incredible passage where, in all seriousness, the book is horrifyingly, soul-crushingly, murderously earnest. Like, the book does not have, it would not know a joke if anybody had slapped it in the face, which is amusing. But there's this incredibly earnest passage in it where one of the characters says to Siddhartha, in fact, you know that soft is stronger than weak. And it goes on. And I just about died because I know from Lotion Company that soft unites us all. In fact,
it does. Yeah, famously, the power of soft, TM. So there it is. There it is. So the power of soft unites us all. That's it. This was Creative Things. Go forth, create cool things. Go forth and create soft things.
Create soft things. Soft things. Yeah. Well, I mean, even if you don't want to, you will have to. You're obliged to, because there's a savage predestination of softness that unites us all. Sorry, of soft that unites us all. So whether you want us to, whether you want to or not, you are
right. You are compelled.
You're compelled.
Not unlike how you might be compelled by the power of Christ if you're a demon.
Yeah, and somebody repeats it like approximately 1,000 times in 2 minutes.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Exactly. Which is, of course, the subject of today's conversation. Exorcism movies. So this is, hopefully going to be part of our little, hopefully annual Halloween series where we do a spooky subject. And this is one I actually wanted to do for a long time. You and I were hanging out last fall. So I think, like over a full year ago. And I had mentioned the desire to talk about these things. And you erupted with the hottest possible take where you said,
it's not the hottest possible
Exorcism.
Take.
You just blurted out as though you had a tick. Exorcism movies are porn and The Exorcist is particularly trash. And we have not visited upon this subject at all, because at that point I said, I need to save this entire conversation for on air. I don't want to. So we've just kind of ignored that elephant in the room for over a year of our friendship. And now we're finally sitting down to flesh this out. So yeah, this is, I'm just going to kind of informally call this, or maybe formally call this, maybe we'll title the podcast this, the Great Exorcism Movie Debate, because predictably, I don't think exorcism movies are bad. I think they can be quite enjoyable. I think some of them are trash, just like some of every genre of film is trash. But I think there are really compelling reasons to argue on behalf of them. I think it's just interesting as that's become a genre. Like, I think that's kind of a fascinating thing that's worthy just artistically of dissecting. So I'm fascinated to hear your points, and I'm fascinated to see if we can come to some kind of shared common ground by the time this episode is done.
Proposal. Exorcist movies are porn and garbage. Proposal. Exorcist movies are actually pretty good sometimes, though. Middle ground. Exorcist movies are porn and garbage. Okay, good. So I'm glad we've come to this middle ground. Now, this is great. Go forth. Create cool things. So, no, I feel like this is great. This episode is this has already been very effective. I feel like this is high business efficacy. Good.
There we go. There we go.
All right, so
do you stand by that extremely hot and non-nuanced take from last year? Would you start off that way now, or are you cooler?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'd still basically start off that way. I've been trying to think I have all these notes, and I was like, well, no, but hold on, here's my cool, calm, collected perspective on exorcism movies. And I was like sitting and thinking, like, can I think of literally a single good point about this? Anything that is not like repugnant to what it means? Nope. That's it. No, that's all they are. So there it is. So no, I'm going to say right now, like, I thought this through. I sat down, I wrote things down, I drew pictures, I gave my inner child some toys to play with. I lit a candle. Look, here's a candle right here. And at the end of it, I still came at a pretty, I would call it no longer a hot take, but a calm, reasonable, and collected take that no, I have no time for this. So I'm not sure why don't you start? Because I think
we should start by defining what we're talking about, only because it seems obvious to me what exorcism movies are, but sometimes I've found on this podcast we can have very different definitions of things. Like when we tried to do an episode on Christmas music, and you were very specifically, you came in saying Christmas music is terrible, but what you actually meant is a very specific subsection of sort of 90s and early 2000s Christmas pop was terrible.
Yeah. Like I said, Christmas music is terrible. Yeah.
So you tend to define things, I don't know, more narrowly, more broadly. I'm not sure than I do. And it's also worth noting that I think you actually just kind of despise all horror films, however you personally define that. So
correct. Yeah.
It's worth kind of elaborating upon that, what you consider horror and what you consider exorcism movies. I consider horror like drama, like comedy, right? Any film that is meant to facilitate that emotion of fear in the same way that a comedy is meant to facilitate feelings of humor. So I have a pretty broad definition for what horror is, and that can include like slasher stuff, which I genuinely dislike, and that can include sort of creepy, mysterious type stuff, which I often do. And then, of course, the titular exorcism films that we're talking about today. An exorcism film I specifically define as where the central conflict, the villain, so to speak, or the source of conflict is that somebody has become possessed by a demon, and that some kind of religious figure has to face probably demons of their own, inevitably, and then get rid of that demon. That this is basically the way all these films work, much the same way that, romantic comedies always have the same, first, second, and third acts. So that's how I define exorcism films, sort of as a subsection of horror. What do you define horror as, and what are you talking about when you say exorcism movies or porn?
Yeah, I think regarding horror stuff, I think that's actually pretty similar to where I would go with it. That the point of it is that really the point of it is to evoke and provoke a certain mostly bodily reaction in the person. The reason personally, I don't enjoy having that part of the person intentionally provoked for no reason, so personally I don't enjoy it. The reason I have no interest in learning to enjoy it, because whatever one can learn to enjoy anything, is that I am unconvinced that it's good for a person to find that enjoyable. I just think that that part of the person, the bodily reaction of fear, it's it's the way in which one is sort of pushed away by things. I think that's there to be recognized, to be responded to, and not to exactly be provoked. Interesting. I find it in a certain way. It's I think there is actually something. It's a more extreme version, but in some ways less insidious of for instance, what cable news does with a totally different part of the person. So I think a significant purpose of why cable news exists, 24-hour cable news channels and stuff like MSNBC, CNN, right, Fox News, these kinds of things, genuinely a significant portion of what they exist to do is to identify and grab the part of the person that elicits physical and psychological anger responses, and to yank on that, to pull it out, and then to hypertrophy it, to just massively overfeed it, so that it just kind of keeps growing. Right. There is a certain pleasure in being provoked at that secondhand level by something that makes you angry. There's a certain pleasure from it. But I think that is actually an evil thing. And now, I'm putting it strongly, but that's actually something that's not good. That the person should not give into that, and and it's actually really deeply wrong for instance, for the name of entertainment, strictly speaking, to provoke that. And I think that some of these, that a passion like fear and its bodily responses, is the same way, where there can actually be something pleasurable to have it being provoked by something at second hand. But I just think that that's actually not good for the person to like have that regularly done, and that it very easily gets out of control and becomes something that's really either by feeding the pleasure too much, or by feeding the fear too much, or by feeding the pleasure in a certain way that you're feeding the fear, I think can actually just communicate things that are really destructive, you know? So like the way, just, I mean, like move like kind of with like torture porn movies, you know, like so the Saw series and stuff like this. You just think,
which,
like,
as I mentioned, I'm not fond of, and I think those are difficult to stomach.
I just say, like, you know,
or justify.
Yeah. So that's a point of common ground there. You can say, like, well, this seems to be something that's really wrong. I say that not just that I don't like that, but I think that there's actually something disordered about like offering that kind of thing to somebody as entertainment. So that's the kind of like conceptual ground that I'm starting from in approaching these things.
Sure.
And that's to say that's a larger map than we're exactly talking about, but like that's the kind of conceptual framework in which I'm thinking.
Right. No, and I think it's important to be clear about that, because, you know, so I think your cable news comparison is solid, except for the fact that, as it often comes down to in our conversations about the arts, you know, oftentimes the difference between whether something is art or whether it's propaganda is whether it is honest about what it is or not, right? And the big problem with cable news is that it is not honest, that, hey, we're here to try to make you angry.
No, right? I agree with you on that. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right. That it portends to just be, hey, we're just here telling you what things are.
We are just telling you the facts.
Right. And then insidiously, you know, has a active desire to scare you and piss you off. Whereas with horror movies, you know, there's very explicitly like, hey, this is what this is for. We're being very honest about this. And so I don't feel that it's manipulative in the same way. I have a problem with the manipulation that you're talking about with the cable news thing, but I don't see that as being present. I would personally like in a horror film more to of any sort, whether it's the slasher kind, which I think is unjustifiable for different reasons, or the kind of spooky, mysterious kind. I would liken kind of the whole genre to like a roller coaster, right? Where it's again, you're going on a ride to freak you out, but you know it's safe, and it's very honest about both elements of that, right? It's very honest about, hey, this is gonna make you feel unsafe, and it's very honest about the fact that you are actually safe. And I think that you know, I'd be curious what your response to that would be. The other big question that I think your argument necessarily arises is, why would fear be wrong to prompt when artificial, quote unquote, artificial or inorganic joy is not wrong to promote or prompt in a comedy, and tears are not wrong to promote in a drama, right? There and there were certainly, you know, people who have of all sorts of religions who throughout history have argued, you know, theater is evil and it's like a sin to be in it for precisely that reason, right? They're arguing, hey, you shouldn't be able to manipulate a person's emotions that way at all. And obviously the church has by and large, you know, in at least modern history been like, yeah, that's kind of dumb, right? You can watch movies, you can go to plays, and, you know, Pope St. John Paul II even argues, right, that films are an exercise in empathy, right? That they're a good way to train us up in empathy. So I'm curious what you think of the roller coaster comparison, just in terms of the honesty of the medium, and then also why you would designate fear as being bad to provoke and not the tears of a drama or the laughs of a comedy.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I could see like some, if I'm trying to think, I guess part of it is that I think when I think of horror movies, I'm really mostly like the things that are coming to mind are really mostly these things like Saw and these kinds of things. So where they're, you know, having their force by this sort of exposure of just like absolute, you know, but whatever bodies being torn apart, or the again, kind of more insidious because more highbrow version. Who's that German director? The movie Wicked Games, both the German version and the American version.
Sure. I forget the name, but
yeah. Anyway, but like stuff like that, I think is actually, I mean, which is it's just a highbrow horror movie, and that's all it is. It's just
right.
with some dressed up.
But I guess when I'm talking about horror, I'm also talking about things like, I'm talking about classics like, the Universal monster movies. I'm talking about, Alfred Hitchcock. I'm talking about Guillermo del Toro. I'm talking about, and exorcism films, which, my problem with, because I still want to hear your response to the roller coaster thing, but my problem with slasher and gore stuff is I think that it threatens to, and I think there are people who could compellingly make an argument against my point. I'm open to being wrong, but my personal take is just that those things threaten to blunt empathy because you're seeing actual carnage happen and you're sort of dissociating from it in order to enjoy it, right? Because the natural human response to gore and those kinds of things should not actually be fear so much as it is, I want to help this person. Right. And if you're limiting that because, I want to be entertained from a psychological perspective, like speaking as a counselor, I think that's a little weird and a little dangerous and a little gray area. But things like the Exorcism movies we're talking about today, or, Alfred Hitchcock type stuff, Guillermo del Toro's type stuff, to me, that doesn't present the same all human beings are evil kind of cynicism that some of the gore stuff does. It doesn't seek to blunt empathy the way that gore type stuff does. Instead, it just seeks to facilitate spooky feelings in the same way that a roller coaster might, in my mind. And at best, maybe awakens you to the possibility of things that you're otherwise too cynical to consider, which we'll get into later in the episode. But
sure. Yeah. See, the funny thing is, I mean, I think basically what's the difference between provoking that passion and provoking other passions is ultimately that it's just a baser passion, fear is just given to us for a really restricted reason, which is to like identify evils so that we can recognize them to be either overcome or avoided. And so it's just a baser passion, and that has a really specific purpose, that's pretty low on the chain of being a human being, especially the kind of fear that's being provoked by these things, which is a sort of a base bodily existential fear, which is just in the non-philosophical sense, just like, oh no, I used to have two legs and now I have one leg because someone has eaten it or whatever.
Right.
So I just think that the role of the passions in the person mean that this is just not one that can be meaningfully provoked in a way that actually then produces good in a fruitful way. Now, and again, like I don't want to be absolutely apodictic about that universal, making an absolutely universal statement about it. The example of Hitchcock, though, is I think actually really fruitful because while I have never seen the famous Psycho, mostly just because I felt like I kind of came to it too late, by the time that I was like,
it's kind of spoiled for you.
Yeah,
already,
I was like, maybe I could watch Psycho, but it's like I've kind of seen all of these scenes anyway. You know how it is. But he has that's a good example because, like, for instance, The Birds is a terrible movie, and The Birds exists for no other reason than to it's a kind of exclusivity here that I think is also part of it because it's kind of a low passion. I think when something is exclusively focused on just provoking this one pretty narrow response over and over and over again, the thing itself just ends up becoming very shallow. So like The Birds is a terrible movie, just inexpressibly shallow. I mean, in the end, it's actually hilarious when you see like these ladies running around like holding these bird models onto their hair as they're running, being, killed by these birds or whatever. But there's just nothing to it. Like you can't make an interesting human drama out of it. Where like he has plenty of movies where he makes incredibly fascinating human drama where there are moments of real tension and even moments of real fear. But the point is not the provocation of fear. The point is the like exploration of some human reality. Like, I Confess is very interesting work about whatever. Christian honesty in a real sense, or like The Rope, which is a really interesting sort of, it's kind of a knockoff Dostoevsky, but it's still quite good. Anyway, so like you can one can provoke fear in film and drama and all kinds of things that, and I think is perfectly fine. It's just like kind of doing it as the sole function, I think just is shallow and can be dangerous.
Isn't that true of any art form though? Like the difference between a good romance movie or play and a poor one is, you know, a poor one, like sort of a Hallmark Christmas film, so to speak, to go back to you know, our Christmas music stuff, is brutally formulaic because they're only trying to elicit those comfy cozies and they don't really care about creating real art. That in a sense I can agree is porn in the sense that it's just there to facilitate and manipulate a very specific response with nothing else attached to it, right? But there are great romantic films and plays which really explore the human condition and the psyche and how relationships actually work, and then do sort of in the course of that facilitate, you know, comfy, cozy, warm and fuzzy butterfly type feelings. And I think you could make the argument that there are, you know, horror films, fear-based films, a lot of what Mike Flanagan does, for instance, with Haunting of Hill House on Netflix, you know, and as I keep mentioning, Guillermo del Toro and things like that. I think there are people who use the sort of framing device of a horror film, hey, this is going to freak you out, to explore some really important things. And I think that's possible. I don't know that and I'm bringing it up because I'm not sure how much it makes sense to throw the baby out with the bathwater just because that's a quote unquote negative feeling. I mean, it is worth noting, of course, that you're coming from sort of a traditional philosophy background of their higher and lower passions, where I'm coming from more of a psychological perspective where, hey, God has given us all our feelings for a reason and they're important and they're all kind of on the same level playing field to my mind. So I think right away that's a difference in our thinking, but I just have a hard time accepting that it's not possible to do some really deep and thought-provoking things with something that is at least framed as scary. And that, again, going back to my roller coaster comparison, that facilitating scary feelings is in any way particularly wronger than facilitating, you know, warm and fuzzies or sad tears.
Yeah. Yeah. So with the roller coaster example, which I mean, roller coasters are a good example. I mean, in all seriousness, roller coasters are, like, thinking of them as a moral example, they are actually an interesting and a not entirely straightforwardly simple moral question. I'm not anybody who has weird leanings or whatever, like, don't say that Father told you that, like, going on a roller coaster is like worshiping the devil. Yeah, I feel
like this is an episode that if you struggle with scrupulosity, you should just not listen to, because you're going to take us way too seriously on
probably
everything.
Turn this off. But no, but I mean, seriously, I mean, you know, like at the level where, like, I was talking with one of my friends about, like, in a real sense, it can actually be really, really difficult to try to think in a serious ethical way about, like, why is it that Diet Cola is, like, morally acceptable? This does seem
what?
Like Diet Cola. It's actually a really hard question because it's ingestion for pleasure's sake. It has no purpose. Like, everything about its actual function, like, has been stripped away from it. Intentionally, which seems that, like, I'm doing this thing just to give myself pleasure for, like, literally no reason other than just wanting to feel pleasure, which is not a sufficient reason. Yeah, no, so basically there are very ordinary daily things that we do that actually, when you try to think about them seriously, become much more difficult to explain. And I do think roller coasters are one of them. I'm not trying to get into that problem right now, but just to say, like, I accept your challenge to say, like, but aren't they like roller coasters? And I say, actually, maybe, yeah. That doesn't necessarily help the case, though. But we're not going to get into that right now. Yeah, I guess I just think that, like, the kinds of things that one does, well, I mean, but ultimately, like, something that, for instance, like, just exists to provoke tears, I think is going to be something similar, because, again, this is like it's it's a response to a bad thing. That like but again, it's a response to a bad thing, but because of the way that we're built, like we can also enjoy having it pulled on and tugged on in certain ways, you know. And I think if something exists exclusively for that purpose, then that's also not great. And I think this is also not something that should be totally encouraged. Laughter, I think, is a little bit different because it's actually like the ordering of it is all correct. Like, so all these other things say like, I'm looking at something that's actually in itself negative, like something about the person that's given to me to respond to something that's actually in itself bad, or to be avoided, or to be kind of shifted around or resisted in one kind of way or another. But I like it. I like being provoked in that way anyway. Where laughter is different. The directionality is all the same. It's like, this thing is actually good. I'm responding to something that's good. I like it. I like it because it's good. And that's that. And I mean, obviously it has risks. Like, it could be trivializing, you know, you can, whatever, laugh while Rome burns or whatever. Or you can laugh at things that are actually evil that you shouldn't laugh at, or, you know, whatever, you know, I mean, things can be abused, but the directionality of them is different, because in laughter, it's actually all pointing in the same direction.
Sure.
So
it's interesting to think about. I mean, and I want to shift this into the exorcism thing.
Yeah. Sorry, there's a lot of background.
No, you're not. No, you don't have to apologize. I mean, I think this is all really, really important kind of background and subtext, because I wouldn't have initially thought that we're coming in from fundamentally different perspectives on what kind of emotions are for, right? I don't personally see the quote unquote negative emotions as negative, right? Coming from a psychotherapeutic background, I see all emotions as being there essentially to bond us in various ways, and with other people, and from a Catholic perspective with God, right? You know, when I'm sad, I'm able to mourn with those who mourn, right? And being able to share that collective experience of sadness brings me closer to other people and to my interior self and to God, and therefore, you know, insofar as I allow it to be used for the purposes of relationship, it is sacred. Now, of course, it can become masturbatory. It can become, you know, self-focused and self-indulgent. And this, you know, is one of the ways we might describe something like clinical depression, right? But it's not, as long as it is attuned to the purposes of building connection, a bad thing in my mind. And the same can be said for, you know, the quote unquote positive emotions, joy, laughter, you know, love, all these kinds of things, right? You know, not capital L love, of course, but you know what I mean? I see fear in, you know, the same way. Of course, fear can be a sort of masturbatory thing where, you know, I'm feeling fear for fear's sake and I'm ruminating upon it. And that's when we get into things like clinical anxiety and stuff like this. But I think at its core, fear is, again, speaking from a Catholic perspective, sort of created in us to bond us closer together, to help us identify that which is bad and respond to it appropriately. Again, with connection with the people. And I think a horror film where, and this is how I'm going to pivot into the exorcism idea, a horror film where it says, look at these evil spiritual entities. That's scary. Let's watch Christ be victorious over that. Let's watch the reality of that evil. Let's watch those things. I think that is an exercise in human emotion, which is ultimately a good, or at least can be a good, as long as you use it the right way. And that's basically true of all art, right? So that's going to be my kind of central argument here. I think there are limits, of course, and the way you present things matters and all this sort of thing. But I'm glad we're touching on this, because I do think at the end of the day, this is going to have a lot to do with what we think fear is for.
Yeah, that's probably right. Yeah. And as far as like what specifically exorcism movies are, I was thinking about like how would I define it? So I have a little proposal. It's not exactly this isn't a rigorous definition, but it's a sort of an observation on the way towards a definition, which is a very academic thing to do.
Sure. Yes.
But
that is you. You live in a monastery in Germany and you grow your beard long. So
I do, and I write about dead people. So like M. Night Shyamalan, I write about dead people. So yeah, I would say the Exorcism. So okay, Exorcism movies. So what are they? So I'm looking at it. Okay, so it's a horror film genre. It's called a subfilm of horror, of a subgenre of horror film. Conceptually, I think that they exist by like exploiting fears about specifically loss of control, and loss of control conceived of in simultaneously one of two ways. I mean, but simultaneous, which is like the ultimate loss of control in death, but then that also being presaged or foreshadowed or experienced in advance by the loss of either mental or psychological control because of the devil. So okay, so I'd say, so like what's the major fear happening here? It's this sort of fear of loss of control. Interestingly, I would say that, just as a point of comparison, for a point of reflection about this, I would say that zombie movies and exorcism movies share, in this respect, a basic conceptual affinity, that they are both subgenres of the horror film, exploiting fears of loss of control, except that the zombie movie involves material or scientific causes, so pseudoscientific causes. But the point is material. There's always, it's strictly material agency.
Right.
It's some kind of virus. Because it's
right.
Because it's a latter half of the 20th century concern primarily, and so it's like medico-scientific, right? So the causality is actuated by like material scientific stuff, where with exorcism movies, the causalities, like much of the drama is actually fairly similar, except that the actuation is the spiritual religious cause. Often, if you lift the hood a little bit, it's in fact also a material cause, because in fact it's pretty hard for people to think about spiritual causality and non-material beings. So usually, but that's just a whole philosophical problem, which is but the point is what they're looking for is material, like spiritual and religious causes. So that's a certain proposal. If that has merit to it, one thing that's interesting about it is that the material scientific one is by its nature almost exclusively assumed to be incurable, where the religious one isn't. Like the structure of the genre of the religious one.
No, I was going to point that out when you compared them.
Curable, which is very interesting. Very interesting. I think it actually points ultimately. I would connect that more to the fact that, in fact, broadly speaking, we actually just think that like spiritual problems are kind of BS. But medical problems, those are serious. No, medical problems are serious. And spiritual problems are just kind of, just playing games. So of course you can get over that. You just got to get over it, But like if medical problem, you got a virus, man, you got a virus, you're probably going to die.
Right. That's interesting. That's not where I would take it.
Yeah, no, again, I'm not saying it. I'm not proposing it strictly as like the only way of conceiving of it.
It's like an ultimate thing. But I think it's definitely a legitimate way to read the stuff. Yeah. I mean, because I see it conversing me. I will, openly admit I am not a fan of zombie stuff at all. Zombie stuff freaks me out. I don't think it's like evil necessarily, but it freaks me out in a way that I don't like. It's just less than fear. It's more just disgust. And I don't like being disgusted by things. But I do think that one of the central defenses that I would offer of exorcism films is that what I would describe not as sort of a debasing of the validity of spiritual concerns, but rather just the implicit hope in them, right? Zombie films, I think, are distasteful to me because there is no hope, right? It's just about surviving and living another day, and then it all is going to happen again tomorrow because the zombies are still around, right? Where there is this implicit hope juxtaposed against the fear in most exorcism films, not all. Some seek to subvert that hope because it's such an important part of the genre that, some artists think it worthwhile to subvert it. But I think it is, a pretty important part of what makes up the kind of subcategory of horror, that it is always this fear and hope juxtaposed. And I read an interesting analysis in preparation for this episode about exorcism films, that exorcism films really rose up. And this is in contrast with how kind of zombie films rose up, right? Zombie films rise up in the late 60s. Romero does Night of the Living Dead and My Native Pittsburgh and all this stuff, very much as a very explicit analogy for capitalism, right? And the whole idea is, capitalism is turning us into zombies, man. And he films it in a shopping mall. And all this stuff,
gosh,
right?
malls, man, malls.
Right. Which at some point I think was probably a revelatory point. Hack now, of course, but this is what happens to art that ages. Exorcism films, at least according to some of the thought I was reading and some of these essays, were really kind of a response to sort of sword and sandal biblical epics had been the only way to express faith artistically in cinema for the majority of the history of cinema. And the struggle of being a faithful person, the fear of knowing how to trust God when things are really scary, the reality of evil, that just wasn't touched upon in good cinema. That was just not a thing that was explored religiously. And we enter into the 60s when all that stuff is being re-examined, and the film The Exorcist creates a whole subgenre of horror because it says this is a way that people who are hurting, people who are not in denial about the reality of evil, people who are not pretending everything's hunky-dory all the time, can explore faith. It sort of starts off saying, yes, things are really as scary as you think they are, right? The sort of fear of it, the existence of the demon, right, is a given. Things are really as terrible as you think they are. We're not going to, shine you on that. We're not going to be all Jesus-y and hunky-dory, but we're going to take you to the next level, which is there is hope in that evil. And in fact, the hope of the evil is, and this is why ultimately I think, these films are comforting to people, is the evil always can be defeated. Right. So that's, that's a comforting thing to go watch an exorcism film, because this thing that you're afraid of ultimately, is going to be defeated at the end, where with a slasher movie or with a zombie movie, that's just not the case. And I whether or not you agree that that's good or right, I think that's interesting in the history of cinema, that's when it sort of arose and what it potentially arose in response to.
I didn't know that, but it is interesting when you think about that, yeah, the sort of, saccharine cheese of
The Robe or
Ben-Hur,
any of these kinds of films.
Yeah, truly, this man was the Son of God. I mean, it's hard to deny that. There it is, though. Or all these like those cheeseball musicals and stuff. I never saw any of these people talk about them.
Godspell, Jesus Christ Superstar.
Yeah, and I guess I'm also thinking of like the slightly, when are these, like White Christmas, like all these Bing Crosby and stuff movies, and like
you mean like the sort of saccharine priest musicals going
exactly.
My way, Bells of St. Mary's,
exactly.
which we have to dedicate a whole episode to with the hot priest cliche, because he basically invented that or reinvented that. But yeah,
and then I lived it. But yeah, I am not pleased at how long it even took you to acknowledge that was to acknowledge that long enough to laugh at it. It's like, what the hell is he? Oh, it's a joke. Oh, thank God.
You are the Fleabag hot priest.
I am. It's true. It's terrible. Yeah, that's how it is. But ultimately, redemption at the end. So that's how it goes.
Yeah.
I'm distracted by being a hot priest. Hold on. Before I was being a hot priest, what was I? I don't know. Yeah. So, I mean,
the sacchariness of these
right.
films.
I mean, so I never saw these movies. I mean, I until proven otherwise, basically hate movies that are made before the 90s. I don't want to be one of those people. I want to be like, oh, well, yes. I'm so sorry that you don't know the golden films of the 1950s. It's
did just quote several Hitchcock movies that
Yeah.
I haven't seen. So I mean, you're not entirely.
Hitchcock's not. Yeah, Hitchcock can be really good. He can be terrible too, but like,
I've seen mainly the terrible ones. So
good for you. Yeah, congratulations. Yeah. He can be good though. I swear. It's incredible how bad he can be at the same time. Anyway,
and isn't that at the end of the day? Isn't that all of us?
So beautiful. Thank you.
End of episode. Go for the Greek.
Are we just all air conditioners? Yeah, right. Exactly. So
you condition it hot, I condition it cold.
That's my point. Yeah. So
we've lost everyone by this point. We've completely alienated every last listener by this point. It's
okay, guys. If you're really upset about what's just happened, you can just rewind and then fast forward over the last 10 minutes, which I think will have the same effect as not having listened to it. You have me at an obvious sort of like an easy point here, because like anytime that you want me to that you want to convince me that I should like something, the easiest way to do it is just to tell me that, oh, well, it's a response to like bankrupt, superficial, moralistic, fake religiosity from the 1950s and 60s. Like, well, then naturally you kind of sold me already. But so don't think it's going to be that easy this time, buddy. Just because that's always true doesn't mean this makes us any better. Okay. A, The Exorcist is from 1973. B, I mean, no, but genuinely, that is a really interesting idea. And that, I mean, if that's a true historical analysis, I have no particular reason to believe it's not. But again, I just said that I just disavowed basically all knowledge of any film made in the 1960s. So there it is. But if that's a true historical analysis, it's really interesting, and it should be like it should be genuinely disturbing for anybody that like, hey, maybe there's like a mode of like expressing and thinking about religion that people thought would be like really heartwarming and really helpful. But that turned out, in fact, to be so stultifying and so partial as a depiction of what it means to be a human being who actually believes in God, that the only way to correct for it was to make the blankety blank exorcist.
Right.
That should give you pause. Like, oh, maybe I've taken a wrong turn somewhere. If you said this is the liberating vision of like an authentic and complete Christianity that we have been missing all along, and it's The Exorcist, then okay.
Then I might not disagree with you, but holy shit, how did we get here?
Yeah, that's a whole friggin' actual disaster crisis. Okay, so if The Exorcist,
a crisis, if you will,
maybe if I will. So if The Exorcist is in fact the DEFCON 5 sirens ringing outside of every government building in the United States, announcing that a nuclear blast is imminent. If that's what The Exorcist is, then like, okay, I can acknowledge that like maybe that was something that was important at the time. I never want to watch it ever again. And if there was a movie, the thing is, when I watched The Exorcist, it joined automatically that second the very, very coveted class of movies that I would literally unsee if I could. Not just I'm never going to see this again, but I would unsee this if I could.
I think this is important too. When in your history did you watch this? Did you watch this prior to your conversion to Catholicism? Afterwards?
No, after,
once you were already a priest?
I think I was in college. I think I was in college when we watched it.
But this was back during your most scrupulous days, because weren't you like especially kind of?
No, that was before
in college.
The most was a little bit beforehand, actually. But okay. Yeah, I mean, like, I was not as much of a chill dude as I am now, he says as he strokes his beard.
I often wonder though, because you've knocked other things in this podcast, like, and I know I'm going to get you started here, but like the musical Les Miserables,
oh my gosh,
like, oh, it's trash, it's awful. And then I'm like, whoa, when did you see it? And you're like, I was, I was wearing my metal shirt and I was dating this girl and I went to see Les Mis and it traumatized me. And I'm like, maybe if you revisited this now as like a well-formed adult.
Please,
but,
I saw Les Mis in the winter of 2012, and it was like a nightmare. It made me wish that the nearly fatal car accident I had been in had in fact been fatal. No, Les Mis is a disaster. Don't get me started. But Yeah. So Exorcist. No, I just think. I mean, in case anybody else is wondering, like, oh, you said it's a very narrow class of films that you would unsee. What else could possibly be in that class? Well, I tell you, it's not a set of one. It's at least a set of two, because the other one is Requiem for a Dream, which I would unsee if I possibly could.
Oh, very interesting.
Yes, because that movie is garbage. But anyway, yeah. So the meta point, if true, I find extremely interesting, and really very much worth thinking about. It does pretty well map onto my sense of like how wrong a lot of things were with public and widely held conceptions about Christianity in America in the 50s and 60s. If true, it would also map on pretty clearly to my sense of how like things didn't really get any better. Because just watching the nuclear blast go off doesn't actually fix the problem. But yeah, so no, but that higher order point is extremely, extremely interesting.
Well, you're welcome.
Thank you. I like it was your point, but like now I'm being praised for it. Thank you.
Yeah, exactly. I want to share, because I guess my argument here is, could all these films be done better or differently? Or if you had a deeper, richer sense of spirituality, could you do one better? Yeah, always. I mean, that's basically always my thesis statement for every art form, right? I'm narcissistic that way, but I do think there's something delightfully honest about horror. And I say this as someone who doesn't actually watch a lot of these things because I get scaled, but I think there's something really delightfully honest about horror, and in particular, spiritually based horror. I've referenced Guillermo del Toro a lot. He's a Hispanic filmmaker. He did Shape of Water, which I believe he won an Oscar for, but also the original Hellboy films, which are just fantastic. I love them with my whole heart. And then some, really great
Pan's
horror
Labyrinth.
films like by Pan's Labyrinth, what's it called? Scarlet Peak, and then the new Cabinet of Curiosities on Netflix, which is sort of a horror anthology. And he has a really good quote on this. He says, "Fear is a very spiritual emotion. And in a world where we are so pragmatic and so materialistic, fear is the only emotion that allows even a sophisticated person with an iPhone and an iPad and a car and cable to believe in something beyond. We are such skeptics that we find it corny to believe in God and angels or a spiritual afterlife. But a moment of fear makes our spirit so vulnerable that it allows us to believe in something beyond that. And I think that's very beautiful." And I agree with that sentiment. I mean, I think historically the value of horror films was, again, or exorcism films was, again, that it sought to respond to the sacredness of kind of Christian filmmaking and say, how can we explore these other aspects of faith? But I also think it succeeds at that. I think it still succeeds at that sometimes. I mean, there's obviously really corny garbage examples, but I think what Del Toro is saying here about awakening fear in a positive way to the existence of spiritual things is really valid in my mind, and fits in nicely with my conception of what fear is for, ultimately, going back to our discussion of what all feelings are for.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, I think that's interesting. I don't know. Like that quote from Del Toro, like that sounds, and I like a lot of his films. He's a really interesting guy. But it sounds very interesting, but it doesn't sound true to me. That sounds like awesome. Like I really like how that sounds. I just don't think it sounds true. I just don't think that's true. That fear can take a jaded person, and like that the experience of fear is like an experience of something spiritual that opens up to them up to the possibility of like another or more, or like a broader world. I just don't see it. I don't see it. I don't see it in the way that people actually respond to these films. I don't see it in like the kind of anthropological dynamic of how fear works. I just don't see it. So,
so how have you seen fear manifest in your own in your own experience of art?
It's an interesting question. Thinking about let me stick with this for just a second though with exorcism things because sorry. No, you're fine, because the fear question I think is actually a big part of why I have a lot of concerns about them just as a genre. When I say that they're when I said at the beginning that they're just sort of porny, obviously I don't mean that like they're erotic. I mean, I'm sure there are some. Don't even ask. I'm not aware of any. And I just, this is just a kind of a basic rule of the internet sort of situation, but I'm sure there are some, but like, I wish there weren't. Anyway. But it's more because that there's this sort of morbid, it's a morbid provocation of like an overly strong fear that sort of desperately wants to be satisfied. So there is something here about people who have an even sort of vague connection to Christianity, especially Christianity. I mean, they're not all Christian, but like that's certainly the major genre.
It's pretty much all Christian. There's one that stars Modest Yahoo, and it's set against the background of Hasidic Judaism. But basically all the others.
Oh, is that I think I saw this. It has like a Dybbuk or something in it. Like,
yeah, it's a Dybbuk. Yeah.
That stars Modest. Oh my gosh, Modest Yahoo.
Yeah, he's the one who like tells them about. I haven't seen it. I can't joke. I actually would love to go back and watch it. But John Mulaney has a great bit about Dybbuks, which are, for those of you who don't know, Jewish folkloric demons.
So
where incredible. I guess the group is it a group of 10 men or 12 men? I forget how many men
10 is
are required according to Jewish law.
Jewish law and many things. Yeah,
I think it's 10 men have to get together to expel a Dybbuk in Jewish tradition, but that group is called a minion, and so John Mulaney has an extensive joke about thinking that that's what the Minion movies, like the Despicable Me franchise, are about: a bunch of Orthodox Jews getting together to expel demons. Okay. And he was very disappointed when he went and found that it wasn't, which I find delightful.
Okay, that might be the best thing that has ever come out of those. Yeah, if that is what the Exorcist movie genre needed to produce, then I guess it did what it needed to do, and everybody you can stop making exorcism movies. Yes, you can just stop it.
Yes, but except for Modest Yahoo versus the Despicable Minions, they are majority Christian and majority Catholic. In fact, it's basically, let's be honest with ourselves, the only exposure, the vast majority, the only positive exposure, certainly the vast majority of people have to anything that feels Catholic, right? All the Catholic Anna stuff, collars and stoles and confessional screens and all that shit. It's the only exposure anybody has to any of that in any kind of a positive sense. If it's not that, it's a movie about a priest raping somebody. So it's basically those are your choices.
That's pretty much
it.
I think
is the other reason I'm feeling defensive about exorcism films. I'm like, this is all we have. Don't take this from me.
Guy, we got this and we got doubt. Okay, that's all we got.
Right. This is the only representation we have left. Don't you take this from me, you bastard.
Hey, that movie Calvary was good.
That's true.
No, that's right. That's actually I like that movie. I mean, it
had
all problems,
8 people who saw it.
That's right. Yeah. Hey, no, there were like 10 of us Dominicans who saw it at the same time. Okay, please back off. Yeah, we were 100% of the audience.
Big fans of Irish independent cinema.
Yeah, exactly. Made by a British guy to mock the Irish. So that part I don't love. But in any case, right. So, but I think the thing is there is. I've just seen this happen so much in like random conversations, random groups, like of all different kinds, different age groups, different like different Christian religious backgrounds, etc. Where like people, it's all kind of fun and games. You're talking about this, you're talking about that, talking about this. And then like the moment somebody brings up like demon possession, everyone like it's just like a vacuum in the room, like sucks everyone's attention into this one thing. And then there's just this morbid curiosity that starts, that like has a power and a drive of its own that like almost can't be stopped. That I think,
yeah, for sure.
And I really, like, I'm saying this is a morbid curiosity that there's, and like, what's behind it being a morbid curiosity? Like, that there's this like really, really, really deeply held desire and fear in the human heart to like, we want to think that like demons are all just a bunch of bosh and that we don't have to worry about them and whatever. But then at the same time have this like really, really, really deep fear that maybe they're actually real, and then maybe they're actually like significantly more powerful than we are. And that seems like it could probably be true. And that like maybe in fact, and this is part of it, I think the deeper spiritual sickness that gives rise to it. Maybe the demons are actually more powerful than God, because maybe actually like my own sins and stuff are actually more powerful than God is, because ultimately they're gonna stop God from saving me or whatever.
And let's be honest, there are films like that. I mean, Rosemary's Baby is an excellent example of that. The Omen is an excellent example of that, right? These are films in which Satan unequivocally wins. And worse, where God is absent, right? I mean,
right.
If you actually saw a demon pull out a Glock and shoot Jesus in the face, that would at least be visually interesting, right? But most of the time, it's just God has abandoned us, and the only thing left is the devil.
Devil, yeah. No, in fact, that's actually one of the points I wanted to bring up, is that like is how strange that is, and like that these are worlds where like often worlds where there just is no exactly that, where there's a prince of demons and a host of demons, but there's just no God. If there are creatures that are kind of like angels or that have angel names, they're also not great,
right.
And so,
which we explored in our Angels 2 episode. And I mean, that's something that I definitely grew up with, right? I mean, I even shared kind of vulnerably then that because of kind of the way culture works and the way art works and the art I've been exposed to, I have a much easier time, believing in demons and hell and all those kinds of things than I ever do with angels, right? Angels still even after 2 episodes on it, angels still strain credulity for me. But if you ask me, is possession real and all that stuff, I'm like, oh yeah,
100%.
For sure.
Yeah. And that's also part of why I say like this is a morbid curiosity that's actually like that one has to handle very carefully, and can't just kind of like run about willy-nilly provoking and encouraging.
But I love
precisely
running
because
about willy-nilly.
And running
willy-nilly is my favorite way to run about.
But what about when you run amok? Isn't it almost as much fun as running willy-nilly?
See, now you're making another Halloween reference to the hit film Hocus Pocus, Amok, Amok, Amok. And,
that's even I know
we've
that.
done the full gauntlet
That's true.
of Halloween references. Yeah.
Exactly. But you see, you're not the only person for whom this is true, and this is partly why I think that this is you mentioned at the beginning, sort of thinking psychoanalytic or as a psychotherapist about this, which is a very interesting perspective to bring into the question. And then here specifically with exorcist movies, like thinking as a priest, as a religious about these things, not to sort of come in and tell you like, well, Father says, but just say like, why do I have a very strong and visceral reaction as I think about these things? Part of it is because you are very far from alone in this. So there's this really interesting, very good research center called the Pew Research Center that did a major, they called it a religious landscape study of the United States in 2007. They did it again in 2014, but the most interesting data for this point comes out of this 2007 study, where they identified that 51% of Americans, just simply put, whatever your confession or background or whatever, 51% of Americans said that they believed in a personal God. Just interesting. So not like a life force, not like an abstract idea, not like a Brahman or whatever, but like a personal God. So 51% of Americans said, yeah, I believe in a personal God. 59% they said they believed in hell. And that just, so this there is something here that is like, the technical term is jacked up, right? Like that is actually possible to have 8% more people in America who believe in hell, like as in it's a real place where you go there and it lasts a long time, who don't believe in a personal God. Like they think God is some sort of like essency, life force, power of the universe, but oh yeah, Hitler, my sister-in-law, and my neighbor are going there. It's like, that seems weird. And so the reason I just point this out is like the reason it's relevant in this context is because your experience there about like, it just seems so much easier to believe in exorcism, etc. I mean, the possession by demons and stuff than it is to believe in like, I don't know, angels and whatever, is like, you're not alone in this. And it actually gets much worse than that. And so because that's the case, that it's sort of, just because of the weakness of the human heart, the darkness of the world that we experience around us is actually easier to believe in evil things than it is to believe in good ones, good realities. And then there's this like deep morbid fear of curiosity about, because desperate fear of, the ultimate power of the devil, that draws people in a way that I think one has to genuinely handle with care. And I just don't think that the genre as a film genre attends to the need to handle this with care.
Sure,
and I say
specifically
The Exorcist, which is the one I know the best, I think is a great example of sort of doing everything wrong.
Which would be interesting if we had more time to sort of deconstruct that.
No, for sure.
And compare
Yeah,
it
for
to
sure.
Other films like even The Rite, which I know. I think you've seen The Rite.
No, I refused.
Oh, you refused. I met, so on the morbid curiosity thing, I was able to attend a talk by the exorcist upon whom the book that the movie is based on is based.
This is Gabriel Amath or whatever, Armoth.
No, not that guy.
Not that guy. Okay, he wrote a couple books.
No, he wrote the other stuff that I do actually find incredibly cringe. No, this guy is just a really chill, I forget his name, but really chill, nice dude, Diocese of LA or something like that. Really soft spoken and really, really humble. And anytime there was, a theological question that didn't directly pertain to exorcism, he would refer to like any of the other priests in attendance at the thing and try to kind of pump them up and stuff. So he's a really great guy. But on the whole kind of, morbid curiosity thing, when it came time to question and answer, you could see how just disheartened he was by the questions he was getting, because it was, questions about really, really dumb questions about the movie itself and being like, oh, well, when this priest got possessed by Satan, was that, and he had to go, this movie wasn't real, guys. Do you know that the movie isn't real? It's not a biopic. It's not a documentary. It's just sort of vaguely based on some of the things I said about exorcism and how it works. But like, there's something else there. But then people were asking, is yoga evil? Is Harry Potter evil?
Right.
So you could see
it's like
his spirit get sadder and sadder as this thing went on, because it's just so isn't the freaking point,
Right.
And so I get that, human beings have this preoccupation with evil and can become a little bit narrow about that. But when you say, and this is, I think, the ultimate point we have to get to, when you say that you see everything I'm saying, but you aren't convinced that these kinds of movies handle the issue with care, I obviously can't argue with you there. I mean, hell, there's a movie that we left the trailer at together coming out right now about like the feminist nun who gets sort of, adopted into the secret exorcism school and, it's so dumb and it's so funny and I can't wait to hate watch it. But
isn't it just called The Nun?
No, that's a different one. That's a possessed nun who haunts people. This one is called Prey, but it's like, I think it's called Prey.
Oh no.
But it's like playing back and forth with like, predator and prey and praying and all that. I think that's what it's called. I forget.
It may as well be. Why not?
Doesn't matter. Because Prey is also the name, Prey is also the name of a really, really good sequel to the Alien franchise that they did this year. So I don't want to get it mixed up. But anyway, yeah, it was really, really cool, actually. It's they set the have you seen the Alien movies? They did or not Alien, not Alien, Predator.
I never saw Predator.
So Predator is this big scary alien who like does a rite of passage on Earth by killing like the baddest warrior he can find. Yeah. And the original is just sort of schlocky and him versus Arnold Schwarzenegger, who's, condemned to death row. Right.
Yeah.
And so he, but this one sets it in like 1817 or something. And it's a prequel and it's a Native American girl, essentially in Missouri, who's just living her life in her tribe. And then a predator shows up and starts like killing off the whole tribe. And so it's basically the first half is this really excellent historical movie. And then the other half is like this girl battling this terrifying alien in the forest. And it was all shot on location, totally real, no sound stages in like Edmonton, Canada, in swamps and stuff like that.
Okay, that's
actually
pretty,
fantastic.
That actually sounds pretty great. I'm not going to lie.
It's great. So I don't want, so that was called Prey, Prey. So I don't want to get confused with this stupid nun movie that's coming out. But anyway, regardless, you talk about how it has to be handled with care. And I agree, but I also continue to protest that this is the only place that I have representation. And I want to point, I was hoping to maybe do a whole episode on this, but I don't think it's worth it. I don't think there's enough there. I think we can cover it here. I went to like a Halloween arts and crafts fair, not last weekend, but the previous. And like, you know, they're selling little cute ghost pillows and they're selling, you know, tarot cards and things like this. But mixed up with all of it is like rosaries, crucifixes, like with the corpus on it, nothing ghoulish done with them, not like upside down crucifixes or something, just crucifixes. Yeah. There was like literally prints of First Communion art from the Baltimore Catechism, right? Just like being sold alongside actual taxidermied rattlesnakes and like spooky stuff, right? And I think whether or not you agree that exorcism films have ultimately served a net positive good for the world of faith, which I think would be a hard argument to make. It's what we're left with. It's what we have. And we don't do jack shit with our own branding as a church, right? I mean, we don't have confessional screens really anymore. If you see a confessional screen, I mean, the whole new season of the Chucky television show, based on, you know, the possessed doll, right, is set at a Catholic school. And like the promo posters are fantastic because it's each of the characters behind a confessional screen and, you know, about to be stabbed by Chucky on the other side of the screen. And it's like very well done graphic design and super cool. And some of the best example of like Catholic aesthetics I've seen in a really long time. And we're not doing anything with it. Right. And these films are, for better or worse, kind of getting our message out there better than we are. And, you know, I won't mention this individual's name, but not always badly. I mean, we both are close friends with someone who owes a big part of their conversion to seeing films like this and wondering like, hey, is this actually like serious? Like, do people actually believe this? Real? And looking into it, right?
Interesting. And sure.
I mean, it's possible, right? So I guess my question is, there are obviously bad examples of this genre. There are good examples of this genre, maybe. But what would it look like to do this with more care? Now, maybe you don't think it can be because you don't think that eliciting fear could ever be a good idea in a film. But maybe there's a Alfred Hitchcocky type brand of fear that you could imagine being adopted, and some kind of film which would take what's been done successfully and improve upon which hasn't been done successfully. In other words, what could we do as artists listening to this now and whatever our medium is to take the baton that this subgenre of horror has given us and run with it to something even cooler and better and artistically more valid and theologically more important? Yeah.
No, that's an interesting question. Like what would it actually be? So I think, I mean, again, like a lot of what I think is just kind of broken about the nature of the genre is because it plays so much on this, like, again, like morbid curiosity and like, an unfounded fear that like, a fear that is both founded and unfounded, but is ultimately like based on this like really problematic theological premise that like God is better, more important, ultimately more powerful than, you know, that the devil is, and the devil in my own sin is like ultimately more powerful than God, etc.
Yeah.
So like they just have these weaknesses kind of inherently in them, and like, and that like just some of the gross factor and all these kinds of things, specifically in Exorcist movies, I think just are going to play out that way, because like, yeah, that's just because they're all kind of welling out of this sort of morbidly weird fear. You know, like, it's going to be totally frank. I mean, like, I know exorcists, you know, and like exorcists have weird stories, that it's a matter of faith to believe them or not. I mean, I know these men and I know they're not psychos. Like I know someone who was doing an exorcism and the person that they were exorcising vomited like a 6-foot length of chain that the body couldn't contain, right? Like this wasn't in the body. And during the exorcism, it emerged like a 6-foot length of chain, right? Like these things are weird. It's like really creepy. When you say something like that, like I wouldn't bring it up lightly because it's weird and it brings it all those kind of like, oh, is this weird? Is this guy real? Is this mean? But then if this is possible, then what else is possible? There's all this kind of like, again, like this morbid curiosity stuff of like, and then is that going to happen to me? And like, how do I know? Is it maybe it's already there? Am I feeling chain movements in my tummy, you know, and like all this stuff. And it's so
that
like
sort of medical school syndrome where you're like, what if I have that disease? Yeah.
Right. Exactly. And so like, and in a movie, like just because of the nature of the movie, like you're going to have to end up showing some of those things. But like, you know, an exorcist is very quick to tell you like, you know what, that's not the point of any of these things. Like exorcists aren't like into doing that because like, OMG, did you see this guy just like barf out a 100-pound weight of chain, you know? That's not the point. Like the point is this like, in any way, like no one cares about that. Like you only care about the fact that like here's a person who needs to be like liberated from a spirit that they've let attack them for one reason or another. And like that's all you care about, you know, where like in a film ultimately like you kind of have to care about the other stuff as well. Like you kind of have to want to be grossed out. You kind of want to see the girl spinning around, projectile vomiting and, you know, arching her back and climbing up the wall and, you know, all this stuff. Like the spectacle of it. And this, like, I guess like the spectacle of it is what you kind of have to want to see. And as a filmmaker or whatever, you have to kind of want to show that. And that's why people even complain about like how formulaic the films end up being, because in the end, it's just a matter of like the same certain kind of tricks and spectacles, you know? But because it's not actually the point of the real human theological reality, it ends up being kind of boring. It's like, well, how many times can you see like a girl? It's always a girl. I don't know why. There's some sort of misogynistic thing, but like there's always a girl who's like, you know, crawling up a wall backwards or something like this. And it's like, okay,
sure, yeah,
adorable, you know? But like, so I don't know. So what could, so I just say, so that's a long way of saying like, that's a little backup for like why, again, like one last set of my concerns about these things and the nature of them. Well, okay. But then like, so what would be a different perspective to draw it in that could be maybe very interesting? I don't know, like an interesting ground to work from. If we say like, well, we, as Christians, we believe these are real. And I don't think in itself that I'd say like, there's much about the experience of being a Christian that like shouldn't be capable of being represented in art, you know, including in film. So how would you do it? And I don't know. I mean, one place that would make me want to start is, for instance, like, I think about the Desert Fathers, who are these old, you know, monks in the particularly very end of the 3rd and 4th, and then most of the 4th century, and then to the 5th, who they just wanted to go to the wild places in imitation of Christ, right? Like going out into the desert and being tempted by the devil and, you know, beasts and these things, that they wanted to go to the wild places where they believed that demons were. And they wanted to not like mano a mano, like fight with the demons. Like, I'm a square off with you and I'm going to show you I'm more powerful. Although there are stories about people who do this, and of course then they usually ends badly. But that they wanted to go to the wild places that seemed to testify by their existence that Christ was not, or that Christ had not won the victory over sin and death. And they enacted, they went into the wild places to be places where Christ would enact his victory. That they went there to hunger and to thirst and to be alone and to pray the Psalms and to pray the Mass, so that in the most desolate and wild places that seemed to be physical testimonies to the ultimate triumph and power of the devil, that there, simply put, Christ would literally triumph in their flesh. And that this is a conception of like demons and the way in which we, like the human person, fights against them. That is, I think, a really fascinating realm and ground for where to think artistically about these things. I mean, like if one reads these stories and they're two conveniently important collections of stuff from the 4th century, you see these people talking about and seeing demons and talking to demons and doing all these things, but there's no spectacle for the most part. I mean, some occasionally, but for the most part, there's no spectacle. It's just like being in the wild places, including, and this is, I think, the whole point, like the wild places of the heart where God is not, and demanding to be present there. Which is just awesome. And I think, like, I don't know. I mean, so I'm not saying like, I don't know where that goes, but that's a very different starting point, that I think maybe let's say like, okay, we see the toxically, radioactively saccharine, disgusting problems of like 50s and 60s moralistic Catholicism or whatever. And now we've seen the like toxically explosive, sort of obsessive 1970s and beyond kind of a morbid obsession with everything that seems to speak against the power of God and is still ultimately super moralistic and obsessed with the same things that the 50s and 60s were. So now let's try to bracket all that and say like, well, what will be a totally fresh and different starting ground? I think that I'm not saying like, let's make a movie about Nitria in Egypt. I'm saying like this kind of conception about like what a demon is, what it is to live in a world where there are demons. What is it to live in a world where, with Christ, could be, I don't know, that could be an interesting starting point.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I mean, I think personally, because I have a higher regard for fear as a stimulated emotion or a simulated emotion, I think you could have a lot of fun with a movie where, because this is, I think, the other problem with exorcism films, and I've mentioned before, this idea of a gaze, right? So the male gaze when depicting women in art is often flawed, or argued to be flawed anyway, or the importance of representation of a given community from their own gaze as opposed to an outward one by another community. And I think one of the big problems with exorcism films is often and this isn't a problem, this is just where the creator is coming from, but they are often ultimately explorations of faith and whether to believe or not, which I think is sort of partially what you're pointing to. And I think once you're in the church, that's not the question anymore. There's so many other more interesting questions than whether to believe or not. And I think playing with those questions, looking at, for instance, this is something I think about a lot, the most interesting thing to me about a priest isn't the most interesting thing to secular people, which is his celibacy and the fact that he believes in something. The most interesting thing to me about a priest is his fatherhood, right? And I think it'd be really interesting to explore the nature of fatherhood with the background conceit of an exorcism movie. Like, I think that's an interesting idea, or any of those other elements of faith that that are a little more nuanced and are a little more personal to those who actually experience it. And I think you could have a lot of fun, if you want to throw in, horses with red eyes and, blood and chains and all that kind of thing to that film, because there's a specific genre you're trying to subvert. I have a high enough regard for fear that I think that could be really interesting and promising. But I do agree with your central thesis that, it's sort of the cliche of keep Christ in Christmas, but I think keep Christ in exorcism movies somehow including the victory of Christ in there and having that be more the point than just exploring and indulging our ghoulish fascination with all that is evil. I think that's as good a starting point as any we could have. But I do think it's important. I mean, again, there are other people, very well-intentioned people. I'm not trying to be to go back to your cable news thing. I'm not trying to rattle chains and villainize people. They're very well-intentioned people making exorcism movies, right? And but other people besides us are owning our aesthetics. And like Catholic aesthetics are cool as shit, and we don't do anything with them. And so I want to challenge people to go do cool shit with them. And do cool shit with responding to, I think, the invitation that exorcism films are, whether or not it's the invitation we want. It's the invitation we've got, and I think there are interesting ways that we should discern answering that invitation.
Yeah, I think that seems great. Yeah, I think that's awesome. Yeah, you got it, man.
Cool. Well, with that in mind, and that invitation of our own extended to all of you, we wish you a very blessed, spooky season. Go forth and create cool things.
You've been listening to Created Things, a podcast of Catholic creatives, hosted by Father Gabriel Toretta OP and Jacob Flores Popchek, produced by Jessica Flores Popchek and Kyle Meineke. To find out more about how you can support the podcast and other ventures for artists, visit catholiccreatives.org/support.